Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming. My name is Killjoy, and today we're going to be talking about Sonic Superstars. This is a game that basically came out a few years ago and was kind of received average to above average. It wasn't particularly didn't seem like it was well liked that much. I had a friend of mine say that the game wasn't that great and the music kind of sucked. But over the Christmas period, I decided to pick it up for about £20 in the UK, which I thought was kind of reasonable for a 2D Sonic game, and give it a whirl. Now, my entire experience of this game has been like a swing of emotions, where there's points where I'm really enjoying it and points where I'm absolutely hating the game. So today I want to talk about what the game does right, what the game does wrong, and kind of where I feel on it. Because I think I got to the final boss and didn't enjoy it, so I stopped playing. But before we get to all of that, let's talk about what I think this game does right and go from there. First off, something that's really cool about this game is that the characters themselves, you have Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy to start with, they handle like classic Sonic games. This game feels like, physics-wise, even though it's a 3D game technically, it feels like these characters handle like they do in the original games, like in their counterparts, which is quite a good feat. I primarily played the game as Sonic. I primarily played it in single player. In fact, I've only played it in single player, but I played as Sonic, and Sonic felt right. He had the drop dash, he had the spin dash, he jumped the right height, he moved the right height, all the physics and things felt correct. I was like, oh, this is like picking up a classic Sonic game, but in this new skin, and it felt right. He moved how he should move. You know, like Sonic sometimes doesn't always have the same vibe or feel to him. It doesn't always feel like he has the same height on his jumps or doesn't move like he should. This game felt right to me, and I think that was something that really nailed and really stands out as you're playing the game. Is like, if you've played a classic Sonic game like 1, 2 or 3 back on the Mega Drive, Sonic's going to feel as similar as he can probably get in this game. So that was obviously a huge part of this game feeling good, like controlling and feeling good, and for the most part I liked how he controlled like that. The stages are also something else in this game that I feel like they lean on that nostalgia in some elements, but pretty much are like their own thing here. You start off on it's like a bridge, it's Bridge Island or something like that, which is very similar to Green Hill, which is what most Sonic games go for. They go for this like nice, colourful art, like bright popping levels, the usual stuff that you expect from a Sonic the Hedgehog game. And I would say that the levels for the most part feel pretty good. There are a couple that are less well designed in my opinion, but for the most part, most of the stages and you have an Act 1 and Act 2 on most of them. Sometimes it's just an Act 1, and you get good ideas from these stages. Sometimes you're going in and out the background. Sometimes you've got pinball elements. Sometimes you've got these new loop-de-loops that you spin around so many times and they blow up and you fly off. I think the game actually nails a lot of interesting elements in the levels. One of the ones, I think, is Golden Palace or this Golden something near the end of the game. That level's really cool because you flip between the background and you also go upside down on the stage. And I'm like, okay, they've actually added in some pretty interesting elements to the stages to make the game feel fairly varied. Like even Speed Jungle, I think, is the second zone. That one's nuts. You're like flying along like branches and like vines, shooting at stuff. Like I think they really nailed parts of this game when it came to the levels. You've even got the cyber zone where you're in cyberspace and you're like electronically flying around places. You're turning into different creatures. Like, I can't knock them for trying new ideas, and for the most part they work. I wouldn't say they're all perfect, but for the most part they work. The incorporating, like, you know, you've got your classic elements, but incorporating new stuff to actually like each stage that you get to, like each new thing, world and stuff. There's one stage which is in Press Factory, I think it's called, and you have this second level where there's bombs in the background. You have to keep hitting switches as you're going on, and you have to kind of like get through the level sort of briskly. You can't really dawdle too much, and that was a really cool concept as well. I didn't really like the level much because I don't like those sort of time limits where you have to like do stuff quickly like that, but I think it worked well. And so the ideas, the stages, there's fresh ideas here. I think this works overall as a good package. You're going to have fun with the main stages and with the fact that the characters handle how you'd expect. And I think that alone is what you really want from a Sonic game, right? You want to be able to enjoy the stages in there. However, there are some things here that I want to talk about. There's two things I want to talk about now that aren't either a good or a bad thing, and they're very subjective, but I can't stick them in they're good or bad, so let's just move on to what they are. The music in this game is interesting because most people know that Sonic the Hedgehog games are renowned for their music. There's always stuff that sticks out. Here, though, there are, in my opinion, some good bits of music in this game. I think there actually are some good ones. But there's also some god-awful music in this game. In this, they decided to bring back the old special stage from Sonic 1, which, if you don't know, is the screen's constantly tilting, Sonic's kind of rolling through, and you have to control him to get to the Chaos Emerald. Here, you're doing that for medals, but the music sounds like Baby's first song. I don't really understand what happened here. It's meant to invoke those emotions. It's awful. Truly, truly awful piece of music. It's really uninspired. It doesn't sound very good. Whereas the original piece of music that plays in Sonic 1 is like it's not the longest loop, but it really hits what it's going for, and I think they could have done a much better job here. On the flip side, Cyberspace has a good tune. Most of the boss fights have good music. Some of the stages vary. I think some of them have strong starts and don't always hit the high notes. Bridge, the first zone's kind of just generic Sonic, so it's not that interesting. But later zones, Cyberspace, the Egg Zone, there's a bunch of ones like that I think actually is pretty decent. But you've got to be willing to put up with some average music, which is kind of weird for a Sonic game, because like if you think about the classics, Green Hill, Emerald Hill, Chemical Plant, you know, there's pretty much anything for the first 3 games, and Knuckles, you know, Angel Island, Hydro City Zone, like there's tons of like awesome tunes. And here it just feels like there are some good ones, but it is not a consistent soundtrack, and I'm not sure what happened. They definitely could have done a better job. The other thing that I do want to bring up that's kind of not a good thing or a bad thing is kind of the look of the game. It goes for a modern rendition of like classic Sonic games, and in some levels it looks pretty good. In Bridge Island or Bridge Zone or whatever it's called, the first one. I should really learn the names of these. I think it looks really good. But then later on you get to like the Sky Temple level and also the water level, which I'm blanking on, like Labyrinth something or whatever. They're really generic looking. Even the desert level looks really generic, and I think, you know, I understand they wanted this to be a Switch game originally. I did play this on Switch too, so, and all that probably did is just make sure the game ran as best as it could, right? Like, the game doesn't run badly at all. But, yeah, the game doesn't have a striking art style. It's very clean, it's very basic in some levels. I mean, it's easy to see what you're doing, which I appreciate, the fact that you're not going to get confused with any of the elements, or at least I didn't. But it's not something to write home about. I definitely think they could have gone in and made a bit more a choice of art style rather than going for something that looks so, I guess, Unity. I don't think the game's made in Unity, but it's got that Unity vibe to it that you kind of get with Unity games, which is unfortunate. I would have loved to have seen some of this stuff just a bit more striking, a bit more, you know, I think going for a 3D art style kind of doesn't help. Like, Sonic Mania looks better than this game, and obviously that's, I think, 2D for the most part, so, and that has like some really nice art and things in it. But this game, it's kind of like, it's not awful, but you will notice that it looks kind of bland at times, so not great. Okay, so let's talk about the things that aren't so great with this game, and start with enemy placement and traps. This is something that no Sonic game can seem to escape, especially on the later levels. Sometimes you just have enemy placement and traps like spikes and flames and things like that that are just, unless you know, like, you just have no way of avoiding, or at least you feel like you have like the smallest chance of avoiding, and it really drives me up the wall. I've forgotten what they're called. It might be shell crackers or something, like the mantis guys that chuck off their like spinny blades. But they brought them back in this game. They're a lot easier to deal with, but even then, some of them are in some really awful placement. It's not enough. This is one of those things where I was like, I can kind of just suck it up and get through the levels and get through the game, because ultimately you've got the rings, you get more rings. It's not, you can take a hit or whatnot, but it is frustrating. Even on the cyberspace level, like, there's just times where the way that your character handles in certain forms doesn't always fit what you're trying to deal with on the screen, and sometimes the enemies are just very difficult. One of the last levels, you get these things that fire out balls, because they almost feel like they're cycle based, so sometimes you just get caught, like, you just come down part of the level and you just get caught by like a shock wave, a missile flying, or like this enemy's firing out these electric balls or whatever it does, and it's kind of like, it's frustrating for all the wrong reasons. Like, I understand trying to make a challenge, you want to be able to have your player progressively deal with more of the tougher enemies, more of the tougher platforming, stuff like that. But with Sonic, it never seems to quite get it right, and especially on the last few levels, at least I am, just running into a lot of things that I'm just like, how was I supposed to know that was there? And I get it, like, these games are about replayability. And when you've got a better understanding of the levels, you can know when those things are coming up, you can judge it. But for a blind playthrough, which is what I've done, I'm like, woo, this feels a bit cheap, which is never great, but it's not something Sonic's ever really nailed in the 2D format. Like, I feel like there are just some placement of enemies that just feel off. One of the biggest issues I personally have with Sonic games is that Sonic 1, for example, is fast, but it's not ludicrously fast. They sped the game up in 2 and 3 and so on, because that's what people were saying, oh, Sonic's about speed. And that's fine, but sometimes the level design does not... They're trying to strike a balance between exploration on some of the different paths and how fast Sonic moves. And honestly, sometimes I wish they would just slow the game down a little bit. Not like loads. We don't want it to be like, we're not talking like Mario speeds, but just give me a bit more warning. I don't need to be going at blisteringly fast speeds a lot of the time in Sonic. If I'm going to be judging how my character moves and things like that versus what's coming up, I'd rather just have a bit more warning and be prepared for that. Sonic feels pretty good, but sometimes in the levels, sometimes especially in the boss fights, how he moves and how he reacts in this classic style does not always suit the bosses, does not always suit the level and what you're dealing with. And I get it, you've got the different characters, but if you're playing a Sonic run, sometimes you're just like, well, this just feels off. Like, I'm moving too fast, so I can't, and again, blind playthrough, I can't judge what's coming up. If the game is just a wee bit slower, let's say 10%, 15% slower, because on a big screen, you get quite a lot of real estate forward and backward, but just a little bit slower to allow for more of that precision platforming, but also to allow for the fact that I don't know what's coming up. I can deal with the things that are coming up, and I think that would go a long way. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think Sonic games will inherently change. I think the level design is to start off and be speedy, and I think the games later as they go, or the levels as they go, they want you to be speedy, but that's more of a risk reward at that point, and now you need to spend more time figuring out how to platform. Which is fine. It's never been any different. It's just, I feel like Sonic 1 is like the perfect speed for Sonic, and it's always gotten faster and faster or stayed at a certain speed and never really come back down for most games. And I think it would benefit in the 2D games to be slightly slower, but I think that is a very subjective thing, and people are going to disagree with that one. But that is something that I found with this game. It didn't feel like, it always feels like it's at odds with, we want you to go fast, but we also want you to do precision platforming at points, and it's like, if you don't know what's coming up, bottomless pit or something like that, you just get absolutely destroyed and you're like, well, that seems a bit cheap. Okay, so the last point that I want to talk about is boss fights, and as of time of recording this, I got to, I think, the final boss, which is like a big egg robot like you'd expect, and it's kind of why I quit playing the game. I don't really have any urge to go back and play it, because the boss fights in this game don't feel modernized in a way that I think they should be. Okay, great, they got rid of lives, you don't have to worry about lives, so that's good, so you can have as many attempts as you want. But there are a couple of boss fights in this, at least 3 that I've done, that are very auto-scroller heavy, and they tend to be some of the worst. I think that the final boss, there's a second phase, and I had no rings, and I died because I didn't know what to expect, and didn't feel like I had a lot of time to deal with it, and then it puts you back at the beginning of the boss fight, and I just think in this day and age, you really should have checkpoints in your boss fight. Now, again, subjective. I'm not going to pretend that that's like a be-all thing for all games, because people will probably like, no, well, challenge and all that, which is fine. I've got no problem with that. But for me personally, I just found that even earlier boss fights, there's one where you have to fight Fang, is it? And you're on on a platform. There's lava underneath you. When you jump, the platform stays where it is. So you have to work out what Fang's patterns are, which is fine. And they get progressively more difficult. But between each time you're fighting him, you have to go through these areas with fire. And what I've noticed is that the fire, the hitbox is kind of... You have to figure that out for yourself. It doesn't always line up with, hey, this is the fire, but sometimes you get hit, sometimes you don't. And that boss fight is very long, and every time you die, you go straight back to the beginning. There's that one. There's the underwater boss in like the labyrinthy zone that just feels for how Sonic plays and how awful he handles underwater by design, I may add. That boss fight gets frustrating because you have to, like, the final part of it is you're underwater, you're trying not to drown, you're also trying to hit like speed off of these spinning like drills. Sometimes I just think that the game, the way that Sonic handles and what the game's chucking at you, they feel very at odds with one another. One is like, this is incredibly precision heavy. Great, that's fine. But Sonic doesn't move that well underwater and doesn't play that well, and you're throwing so many different things at me. And I've had this with a lot of the bosses where it's like, I just didn't feel like they were as tested as much as they needed to be. Now, don't get me wrong, I get it that you want it to be challenging, you want people to, like, as the game goes on, the bosses to get harder. But I feel like there are other Sonic games that have done boss fights better than this one. And they really, really did put me off. And when I got to, like I said, that final one, the level was great, got to the boss, learned what I had to do, that wasn't too bad, and then died and had to start again. And I was like, this is already taking me far too long. Like, it's just when your boss is so much time between attacks and things like that, and like it just, yeah, I just got to that point where I was like, you know what, this game, at points of this game, I think this is a really good modern rendition of what Sonic is, and I think it nails that. And then other times I'm just like doing the boss fights and I'm not having a good time, and I don't really want to carry on playing this because this is those frustrating points that I get to, and ultimately it just kind of kills all my enjoyment. It kills the pace of the game, things like that. Like, you want them to be difficult, but sometimes they just feel unfair and they feel like cheap because not everything's aligned. Personal preference, I get it. Like, some people probably really like the bosses in this game, but I just didn't, and they kind of put me off wanting to continue to finish it, really. So, final thoughts on Sonic Superstars. There is a good game here. I can see why now people didn't think this game was more like, you know, 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10, that kind of around there, because this game has issues, and those issues really pop if you get stuck on a boss and things like that. Ultimately, I think the levels are pretty fun. I think Sonic handles are pretty fun, but when you have such a big roadblock in terms of enemy placement, in terms of the boss fights being a big roadblock, it does put players off, and it does put me off. Even if I've played through pretty much all the stages, I enjoyed the game for what it was, I'm walking away not finishing the game, and I'm okay with that, because I don't want to spend time repeating myself. Like, I could probably do it, but I don't want to, and I'd rather move on to something else. So that is my thoughts on Sonic Superstars. I'm sure I'm late to the party, but welcome to my back catalogue, and that's one game down so far, so we're going to get through that. There is plenty more coming. But it's going to do it for me today, guys, anyway. So thank you so much for watching. As always, if you like the video, hit the like button. Helps out a ton. If you want to see more content like this, especially, like I said, back catalogue and Switch games, I have a load coming up, so I'll be playing a lot of those, so stick around for that. And obviously, feel free to comment, as always, because, like, as I've realised recently, that's a good place for discussion, if not people disagreeing with me, so that's all good. But until next video, I will see you then.